Great. Well, welcome everyone. This is Capital Factory. I'm Joshua Baer. I'm the executive director and founder. We're very happy to have you all here, and in particular to have our special guest, Senator Cruz, here. Capital Factory is Austin's entrepreneurial center of gravity. It's such a great time for Austin, being the fastest growing city in the country, and so much entrepreneurial activity here. And this is the place where that community comes together. We have about 50,000 square feet, about 650 members, and about 30,000 programmers and entrepreneurs will come here this year to meet each other, to learn, to teach things, and to find a place to work, to start their next business, and hopefully create jobs to help all of us. And one important role, Capital Factory is a non-partisan group. We don't support or endorse any particular candidates or initiatives, but we do really see a great role for us being a way to connect elected officials with the technology and startup community. And today is a great example of that. And so we're very, very appreciative to Senator Cruz for coming here today to share his thoughts and to help us connect with him. There was many of us all read the op-ed in the Washington Post a few days ago, and I, personally, just going through it, there were many things there that I agree with strongly. There are one or two things that I might see a little bit of different perspective on, but what I really value is the opportunity to have this dialogue and to talk about it, and that he's here listening to the Austin community and the technology community about it. So thank you all for coming. We've got a few speakers before we hear from the senator, and the next one is Ron Yokubaitis from Data Foundry.
Thanks, Josh. I hope, can you all hear me back there? Is it on? Good back there? Thank you. With Golden Frog, we have a number of companies. We're kind of like a Capital Factory. We've just started a lot of internet companies over the last 20 years, starting with TexasNet. But currently with Golden Frog, and they asked me to speak today about privacy. And Golden Frog, first let me say also, we're just happy to have the opportunity to have the dialogue open among tech folks with Senator Cruz. So, Senator, thanks for coming. I know it's short. I did want to say that Texas has, on privacy, has passed the only statute that requires a search warrant for your email or whatever content, wherever your traffic on the internet can't be pulled out with just a simple letter from law enforcement. This has happened in Texas, and I see Senator Estes is here. He's a big figure in getting privacy put into the Texas statutes, and this is the only state that's done that. So I kind of liken Texas on that to being the Switzerland inside the United States. We want to, I'm dead serious, we want to build on that in Texas. We would also urge the senator that the federal statute is horribly out of date and does not protect email past 6 months, 180 days, or your content. And I, as an internet provider, get a letter, not a subpoena, court order, just a letter from law enforcement, and after 6 months, you got to turn it over. Okay, so you're not aware of all of this, but some people here in Texas are and have been working on it. Now, up in the federal level, we have the ECPA that's stuck in the Senate committee. We would hope the senator could get the Electronics Consumer Privacy Act unstuck and passed, so the whole United States would have the protection that the law enforcement would have to get a search warrant for your email and your privacy on the internet. And we need that at the federal level. And it's not been honored at all. So that's a to-do. I would like to say also, that we one of our problem is with having privacy, you're being surveilled by your broadband ISP, whether it's the cable company or the telephone company. They're part of the surveillance state. We filed 10 years ago with the FCC about this, thought people would be alerted that Deep Packet Inspection is inspecting all your packets, storing it, and it is now the work product, quote unquote, read your terms of service of your local provider. There it was AT&T and Verizon we were complaining about. That was a dull thud in Washington. Still is a dull thud pre-Snowden. So rather than get mad further. My wife and I talked, and 4 years ago decided to start Golden Frog for those people that understood what we were talking about, that you got to encrypt to defeat the surveillance state personally. You don't have our Constitution protecting you. You think you do, you don't. So, but we're welcome to have other companies like ours. We need more diverse, not one choke point or one point of failure. We need more people to do this, so we welcome it. And we hope also on the ECPA we can get the ECPA passed without these administrative carve-outs by the SEC to be exempt from the search warrant. Well, that's letting, again, the dingo babysit, okay? So if they get exception, that's every administrative agency gets to send us back to sending us, oh, they may call it a warrant, but it won't be the strict requirement of probable cause in the criminal courts that a judge go by. This will be fuzzy wuzzy was a bear type stuff. So we need protection. You all need to lobby. We all need to be aware that our privacy is being deprived of us at the local network level, that last mile between you and, say, our data centers here, where you get the open internet and multiple providers and cheap bandwidth and all the good stuff that's unregulated, free market, competitive stuff. Go for it. Your own privacy is in your own hands, and communicate to the senator and the other folks you have. And I probably ought to sit on down and say thank you, Senator, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
This is Bill from Zello. Excuse me, Bill.
I'll be brief. Bill Moore, CEO of an Austin startup called Zello. It's an anonymous walkie-talkie application, and it's for making it simple for groups to communicate. And those groups include protesters. And so we have a couple of experiences, I think, that are related. It's been the #1 overall app in Venezuela, in Ukraine, in Turkey. Most recently, it's popular with the umbrella protest movement in Hong Kong. And these groups like it because it's anonymous, where they can't trust the government. In particular, Venezuela government-owned ISP shut down Zello in the spring, so that got some attention. We were able to get it up and running the next day. We had a lot of help from the technology community, but the point was that our net neutrality problem, wasn't commercial ISPs; it was government. The government of Syria has blocked it completely for a long time. And so as a small internet startup, access to ISPs really hasn't been a problem. And I guess one of the themes I wanted to share was, what problem are we solving here? What's wrong? As a consumer, I think the other half would be you can get 1 gig internet access from Google or from AT&T. It costs $70. It's better, it's faster, it keeps getting better, faster, cheaper. If you look at your phone service, highly regulated. The thought was the last major innovation was touch-tone dialing, in the 1970s, and half the bill is taxes. So the country has a lot of serious problems. It just doesn't seem to me, as a small company, that we need regulations for open internet or internet access. I know it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of points of view. Those rules typically don't help little companies like us. They help big companies. So with that, I introduce Senator Cruz.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. It is great to be home. Let me start just by apologizing. I had intended for this event to go far longer, to have the opportunity to tour the facilities here and to have far more of a discussion and dialogue. And really, I hope that this would be an opportunity to hear from each of you, to learn the challenges you're facing. I unfortunately ended up sitting on an airplane on a tarmac for about 3 hours today. And so I was supposed to be here earlier, but was not. But I'll tell you now, it is my intention to come back and to do what we had planned to do earlier in the day, have the opportunity to tour the facilities and to visit with each of you and have that dialogue, because that's a very important part of what the objective was today. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to talk about the incredible potential that the internet has delivered and the steps we need to take to ensure that it continues delivering on that potential. Now, I've grown up in the tech world. My parents are both mathematicians who became computer programmers at the dawn of the computer age. My dad graduated from UT here in town in 1961. My mom graduated from Rice in 1956 and were programmers in the 50s and 60s, back when you used key punches and cards and tape discs and vacuum tubes. It was a whole different world. And I grew up in Houston when they owned a small tech startup, a seismic data processing company in the oil and gas industry. My very first job was in the tech industry. When my dad hired me as a computer operator, paid me $1 an hour to run big Raytheon 704, 706 computers. They were the size of this wall, and you've probably got more computing power in your watch than those things had. So I grew up working in the tech industry and then somehow got corrupted to the dark side and went into law and politics instead. So it is the innovation that has come from technology and the internet has been incredible. You know, in the early 2000s, I chaired the Internet Task Force at the Federal Trade Commission. In fact, one of the folks here was the CEO of 1-800-CONTACTS because we looked at 10 different industries, and we looked at barriers to e-commerce in 10 different industries, barriers that have been put in place by government regulators, by state legislatures, by federal legislatures, meant to keep out new entrants from the market. You know, the internet has been transformational. It's been transformational, number one, in terms of speech. You know, it used to be the case if you had a point of view, it was hard to get it out. Now, pretty much anyone can sit down, write a blog, project it to the world. You know, you think about how bloggers caused Dan Rather to topple because bloggers in their pajamas fact-checked what he said on TV. That's a brave new world. That would have been 20 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. That each person here has a microphone and a megaphone that's transformational. That freedom of speech is powerful. You look at empowerment. The ability of citizens to organize, to energize, to mobilize. Listen, an incredible example of that, frankly, is the 2008 Obama campaign. It's a phenomenal example of using social media and internet tools to empower people to fight for political change. That sort of transformational organizational tools online 2 decades ago would have been unimaginable. And then there are the entrepreneurial opportunities. You know, we're in a fantastic incubator that realizes every person in this country, if he or she has the desire, can be an entrepreneur, can be a small business owner. Now, it used to be if you wanted to start a small business, it wasn't easy. You had to have some money. You had to have some capital. You had to have a physical location. If you were producing a good, you had to have production facilities. You had to have a wholesaler. You had to have distribution. If you're a single mom trying to feed your kids, that's not easy to get the capital to start a small business in the world we had 2 decades ago. Today, with the net, anyone can put up a website, get a PayPal account, and FedEx, and you have nationwide distribution of a good anywhere in the country. I mean, what an incredible, transformational, innovative shift that has empowered people. And it's all been driven by freedom. You know, in Texas, we're fond of saying, don't mess with Texas. The simple message that I want to convey today that we should remember, that members of Congress should remember, that policymakers should remember, is don't mess with the internet. The freedom that has enabled this to develop, the worst thing that could happen is letting a whole bunch of politicians come in and regulate every aspect of what you're doing. The reason the internet has had the dynamism, the opportunity, the freedom, the diversity is because it hadn't been plagued by excessive regulation. Now, I want to talk about 4 specific applications of those principles. Don't mess with the internet. Number 1, no internet sales tax. Listen, right now in Congress, there's a real possibility that Congress is going to move during the lame duck session to try to impose a massive internet sales tax nationwide, to take small and mom-and-pop retailers who are trying to sell online and subject them to over 9,600 taxing jurisdictions. So let's say you formed a company and you want to make retro lava lamps. Under this legislation, if you're selling retro lava lamps all over the country, you're required to know and collect sales taxes in every state in the union that has a sales tax, every county that has a sales tax, every city that has a sales tax, every school board that has a sales tax, and if the Albany School Board changes its sales tax from 3.25% to 3.5%, you better know that. Now let's go back to the scenario of a single mom trying to start a business. How on earth do you do that? Other than you hire some lawyers, you hire some accountants, or you outsource it. You could hire another big company to do it. Now, why does the internet sales tax have so much force in Washington? It's almost a perfect storm of Washington lobbyists. You have on one side all the brick and mortar retailers, the big box stores, the major retailers, and they very much want to impose those taxes on competition. But you got a second component that people don't realize. The existing law says if you got a physical presence in a state, then you have to collect those sales taxes. So if you're selling here in Texas your lava lamps, you got to collect the Texas sales tax. If you look at the top 20 biggest online retailers, all the big boys, 19 of them are already collecting sales tax in every state that has sales tax because they have physical presences in those states. When you get to be a big boy, big enough to have that physical presence, you're collecting the sales tax in those states. So what's happening for the online sales tax is real simple. The brick and mortar retailers and the big internet retailers are joined together. And they've said it would be a great idea if we slam new taxes on all these little guys. Look, that is a terrible idea. This tax is projected to raise upwards of $380 billion over 10 years. It's not the job of politicians in Washington to side with giant corporations over small startups that are producing innovation and competing in the world. And the key to stopping it, frankly, are the people speaking out. And I'll tell you, in the U.S. Senate earlier this year, we passed the internet sales tax. I spoke out loudly against it. But you saw a large majority of senators, sadly both Democrats and Republicans. I was sorry to see members of my own party participate in that. And yet what happened is there was enough public outcry, enough people said, don't put taxes, sales taxes on the internet, don't strangle mom and pop startup retailers online, that the House of Representatives said they wouldn't take it up. Now, I was very glad to see the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, say last week that he doesn't intend to take up the internet sales tax. And I think it is important for us to continue to speak out to make sure we hold leadership to that commitment and stop the federal government from imposing massive new sales taxes online. A second principle that goes to freedom is we need to preserve ICON and stop foreign governments from having the ability to control and censor the internet. Right now, basic internet operations are governed by a California-based nonprofit icon, which ensures open access to registering domain names without censorship coming from a governmental entity. And unfortunately, the federal government is moving to terminate ICON's authority and to move instead to handing it over to an international committee of stakeholders. And listen, here in the United States, we have been blessed to enjoy freedom, to embrace principles such as the First Amendment, such as freedom of speech. But we shouldn't be so naive as to think that every other country on earth shares those values. And it would be a tragic mistake if we hand over the ability to muzzle speakers, to censor speech, to an international tribunal under the influence or potentially in the future even control of countries like Russia, like Iran, like China. We need to keep the internet free, and that means preventing governments from getting in the middle of it. That's the second principle. A third principle is stopping the federal government from regulating excessively commerce online. And on this, I want to talk about net neutrality. Now, I recognize not everyone in this room is on the same page on net neutrality. But let's talk about it a little bit. The president last week came out for the FCC treating the internet as a public utility and regulating it under Title II of the Telecom Act. Now, that is a dramatic and far-reaching policy pronouncement. If the FCC were to do so, mark my words, everyone who is interested in innovation, who is interested in freedom online, I believe would come to regret that decision. If you look nationally, when you think of regulated monopolies, regulated public utilities, what are the adjectives that come to mind? They are not bold, innovative, fair. Let's give a simple contrast. The Telecommunications Act of 1934 was adopted to regulate these. That's what it existed for, to put regulations in place, and what happened? It froze everything in place. You're right, they did have the major innovation of touch-tone. This is regulated by Title II. This is not. Your smartphone, the internet, the apps, all of this is outside of Title II. The innovation is happening without having to go to government regulators and say, "Mother, may I?" We want a whole lot more of this and a whole lot less of this. For one thing, you ever tried to put one of these in your pocket? It just doesn't work. Look, think about, contrast the U.S. Postal Service to Facebook and Twitter. Which has more innovation? Which has more change? Which empowers people more? Which has more freedom? Contrast taxi commissions in every city to Uber and Lyft. Just cities all over the country have taxi commissions. Name one taxi commission that has introduced any significant consumer improvements in decades. What happens when government starts regulating a service as a public utility? It calcifies everything. It freezes it in place. Each of you who are starting businesses here, the worst thing you want is for 5 unelected bureaucrats in Washington to take charge of regulating the internet as a public utility. Now, you're told on the flip side, well, you don't want big, nasty corporations shutting off access to the internet. That's absolutely right. We don't want that. But let's be clear, this whole net neutrality fight is a fight between big boys. It's a fight between gigantic corporations on one hand, gigantic corporations on the other hand, lobbyists fighting back and forth. Forgive me if I do not weep for Fortune 50 companies who are complaining that other Fortune 50 companies are really mean to me. The government shouldn't be picking winners and losers between them. The government shouldn't be deciding, I like these lobbyists, but not these lobbyists. Oh, wait, you're having another event? Oh, now I like these lobbyists. It's a fight between big boys where government is picking winners and losers, and I promise you, if we go down this step, it won't stop there. It won't stop there. If the government seizes the authority, how do you think it worked out for the phone? We want competition and innovation, and in the delivery, we're seeing more and more competition grow in the provision of internet services, and we want to keep the federal government out of it to preserve the innovation that exists on the internet. Federal government power only moves one direction. It only grows. And so listen, there are a lot of folks in the tech world who legitimately believe, gosh, I need to be protected against giant companies. And listen, I'm as frustrated with I've got a cable company. I'm frustrated with them. Anyone who hadn't yelled at an airline has never flown. If I'm ever arrested, that's probably will be the context of it. But it's not a good thing when the federal government comes in and begins regulating pricing and terms of service. And by the way, if anyone thinks the federal government coming in regulating will somehow help the little guy, I got a bridge to sell you in Amarillo. Whenever the federal government comes in and they put regulations, I promise the regulations over and over and over again will favor the big guys that have armies of lobbyists in there, and will end up putting more burdens on the startups and the entrepreneurs. Why do you think we're seeing the internet sales tax? Because all the mom and pops don't have armies of lobbyists. So Washington listens to the big guys and tries to put barriers in place to new entrants. If the FCC turns the internet into a public utility, the very same thing will happen. The federal government will listen to the giant companies at the expense of all the startups. And let's be clear, look, I don't have anything against big guys. If you're big because you made a better mousetrap, fantastic. As long as you keep selling a better mousetrap, fantastic. And the day you stop is the day you go under. But what has made the internet different? It has been the freedom that characterizes the net. We've got to preserve that. The fourth and final principle I want to say is that our constitutional rights don't end when we go online. We need to protect our rights to privacy. We need to protect our free speech rights. We need to protect the Bill of Rights. One of the most troubling things we've seen in recent years is an expansion of federal government authority into surveilling American citizens. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the USA Freedom Act, along with my friends Rand Paul and Mike Lee, and along with a number of Democratic senators, to end the federal government's bulk collection of data on U.S. citizens and to put in place significant safeguards to protect our privacy rights. Look, security is important. We need to be vigilant protecting this country. But we need to understand that the American people have fundamental privacy rights. And you want to know how extreme this administration is? The last couple of years, this administration went before the U.S. Supreme Court and argued that law enforcement can put a GPS on any American citizen's car with no probable cause, no warrant, no articulable suspicion. I would encourage you, you can go and read the Obama Justice Department went before the Supreme Court and said, right now, law enforcement could go to each of your cars parked outside and put a GPS on each and every one of them and monitor them. And they said the Fourth Amendment, our right to privacy, had zero to say about that. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected their position 9-0. Unanimously, the U.S. Supreme Court said, you know, somehow our copy of the Bill of Rights has that Fourth Amendment thingy in it. We've got to remember that's true. That's true in our physical lives. It's true in our online lives. We need to have a vigilance for the constitutional rights of all Americans. And I feel confident the men and women gathered here, you cherish the freedom we have on the net. You cherish the ability to express your views, whether they're popular or unpopular. You cherish the ability to innovate. And I would encourage you, the only way to preserve that freedom is to speak out against those in Washington who want to increase their power to regulate and tax where they got no business doing. You know what we ought to be doing instead of an internet sales tax, instead of treating the internet as a public utility, instead of winding down with ICON and handing foreign governments over the power to start censoring on the internet? What we ought to be doing instead, and what I hope we do in January with a new majority in the Senate, is pass a permanent ban on internet access taxes. That legislation has passed the House. It's been bottled up in the Senate. I've gone to the floor of the Senate and tried to bring it up. But unfortunately, the current majority party in the Senate blocked it, did not want to put in place a permanent ban on internet access taxes. That would be a pro-freedom agenda. That would be a pro-internet agenda. That would be a pro-economic opportunity and empowerment agenda. And I would encourage everyone here, remember what makes the internet so special, makes it a haven for entrepreneurial experimentation and innovation, and that all of us need to work together to preserve that freedom going forward. Thank you. And I'm happy to do a couple of questions. I'm running to catch another plane, which hopefully I won't sit on the tarmac for. Yes, ma'am.
There's been a lot of things written about net neutrality, and some things that have been brought up. People have said that your position on net neutrality may have been influenced by donations from telecom companies. Can you address that? Have you taken any donations from telecom companies? And if you have, has that influenced your position on this issue?
Thank you for asking that question. Look, the first answer is sure. And listen, you don't run for office in a state as big as Texas, where we've got more media markets than you can shake a stick at, and you got to raise a whole bunch of money without raising money from folks all over the place. And I do think Texans remember the race in 2012 where just about every big company and every big lobbyist was on the other side of me. And we started, you'll remember, in that race, first poll we did, I was at 2%. The margin of error was 3%. I was actually real excited. I went home to my wife, Heidi. I said, we're at 2%. She said, well, technically, couldn't you be at negative 1%? But what we did see was a grassroots movement of first a few dozen, then a few hundred, then a few thousand, then tens of thousands of men and women across Texas that turned that race around. On the question, listen, I've had donations from all sorts of individual citizens, all sorts of companies. Your question, did it influence my views? Not remotely. My views have been the same before and after. And I would note, you know, that's an argument that's a little bit of a red herring. It's one of the things, I'll confess, much to my team's great annoyance. I read Twitter constantly. In fact, every horrible, nasty thing that some hardcore lefty says about me, I read them. I actually like the clever ones. I mean, the nasty ones that are just like, you know, you suck. It's like, okay, that was very clever. But the funny ones I enjoy. That's one of the standard attacks is, gosh, so-and-so because this company gave money, which I find funny because, frankly, there are a lot more big companies on the other side of net neutrality that are donating like crazy to all the politicians pushing this. That, frankly, if you were just interested in cash, it wouldn't be complicated which size has more lobbyist money. It's not even close in terms of the array of where the dollars come from. And to be honest, I've gotten money from both sides. And listen, I'll tell you the conversation we have. There's some lobbyists in this room. I'll tell you the conversation I've had with lobbyists in D.C. They tend to be very straightforward conversations. I say, listen, if you are facing government regulations that are excessive, that are unreasonable, that are hurting your productivity, that are hurting your ability to generate jobs, you will have no greater ally than I am. And I ask any lobbyist, any company that comes, sits down, and I'll meet with just about anybody, to say, listen, you tell me in your business what's hurting productivity, what's hurting job creation, and you will have no greater ally. And the same conversation I have with the same lobbyists, I say, listen, if you're looking for handouts, if you're looking for subsidies, if you're looking for the federal government to favor your company or your industry over somebody else, I ain't your guy. And that's the conversation I've had over and over again, which by and large they understand. On this issue, the real issue should be the merits. In no instance that I am aware of can you point to treating something as a regulated public utility where the result was more innovation rather than freezing it in place. That's the merits and the substance. And I'll mention actually something else. Look, I understand. I actually think some of the big companies who are lobbying for net neutrality will come to regret it if it were to pass. Because, look, they're in negotiations right now with big broadband providers, and they think, well, gosh, if the FCC comes in, that'll give us an advantage in the negotiation. I understand the short-term reasoning that suggests maybe we ought to lobby to get the federal government to help us in this negotiation. But, you know, the Scriptures tells us there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph and his children. If the FCC starts treating the Internet as a public utility with authority for regulating terms of service and pricing, that'll come back to bite a whole lot of the companies that are lobbying for it. And they're looking for a short-term contractual advantage rather than looking to the long-term interests of what it would mean. Listen, think of other regulated industries. Think of the financial industry. Think of the healthcare industry, where on almost every change they have to go to federal regulators and ask, Mother, may I? Can I do this? Can I do that? The internet is different. I promise you, y'all have no idea what a nightmare it is. Now, when the president gave his speech, he said, well, we should extend Title II and treat the internet as a public utility, but the FCC should exercise forbearance on regulating pricing. Really? All right, anyone who believes that ain't never met a government regulator. I would point out, we also were told if we pass Obamacare, your health insurance premiums would go down $2,500 per family. The FCC gets this authority, there ain't going to be no forbearance. And so we ought to look to the merits of how do we protect freedom and innovation on the internet. All right, let's do one final question. Yes, ma'am. I hope very much he doesn't do that. You know, after an election that went well, President Obama boldly told people election have consequences. This last election was, at President Obama's own choosing, a referendum on amnesty. The two issues that dominated Senate races across the country were, number one, stopping Obamacare, bringing real health care reform to empower patients, to expand access, to expand competition, but also to turn around the train wreck that has caused millions of Americans to lose their jobs, to lose their health care under Obamacare. And number two was stopping President Obama's amnesty. And we saw a week ago a tidal wave of an election where the American people clearly do not want the president unilaterally and contrary to law granting amnesty to millions more people who are here illegally. I hope he does not do so. If he does, it would be wrong, it would be unconstitutional, and it would be angry and defiant of the voters. It would be saying to the American people, I don't care what the American people think, because President Obama thinks he apparently knows better than we do. I hope voices of caution. Listen, if you want immigration reform, and I very much believe in common sense immigration reform, the way to do it is to focus on areas of bipartisan agreement. There's overwhelming bipartisan agreement. We got to get serious about securing our borders, about solving the problem of illegal immigration. And there is significant bipartisan agreement that we need to improve and streamline legal immigration. The way to pass immigration reform is focus on those areas of bipartisan agreement, not areas of sharp partisan division. And I would note, when it comes to the high-tech industry, by the way, now a component, we don't know the details of what the president is talking about doing, but there have been all sorts of leaks and rumors, and one component of it apparently concerns high-tech visas. Now that's actually an issue where on substance, I'm not sure what the president is talking about doing, but on substance he and I may well agree. I can tell you there's no stronger advocate of legal immigration in the U.S. Senate than I am. I am the son of an immigrant who came legally from Cuba 57 years ago to come to Austin to go to the University of Texas. And in the Senate, I introduced legislation focused on high-tech, temporary high-skilled workers, H-1B visas, to increase the cap fivefold, from 65,000 to 325,000, because listen, as the people here know, temporary high-skilled workers are pro-growth. They produce jobs. The data show they produce 1.8 American jobs per high-tech visa holder that comes in. Now, I'm sorry to say, in the Senate Judiciary Committee, every Senate Democrat in the Senate Judiciary Committee voted against increasing H-1B visas, voted against my amendment, and the answer they gave, which they said very candidly, is they said, look, we cut a deal. We cut a deal with the union bosses, and we can't change the number. So if a component of what he's talking about doing includes H-1B visas as a policy matter, I may well agree with that, but even so, the way to do it is not the president unilaterally decreeing, I'm changing the law. You know, how many of y'all remember Schoolhouse Rock? You know, how a bill becomes a law? Listen, if he wants to increase H-1B visas, come to Congress, pass a bill. I'll introduce it for him. The only reason it hadn't passed so far is Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats killed it. But if you want to fix the immigration system, if you want to change the immigration system, the way to do so is through legislation. And the way to achieve legislation is to focus on areas of bipartisan agreement and not engage in the constant partisan warfare that has characterized the White House. So I very much hope he doesn't, and I think if he does illegally grant amnesty, I believe that the Congress will do everything humanly possible to stop that. Well, let's wait to see what he does first. I'm not going to game play. Let's see what the president does and then respond when we know what he does or doesn't do.
Sorry, we have to go.
All right. Thank you, everyone. God bless.